So one other thing is, so you were like, are you okay? Like, what do you feel like right now? And I was like, I'm fine. And then, like, I just remember sitting on the couch in our room, and you were like, do you think that could mean he could have ever done anything to you? And all I remember at that point was feeling like I was in a tunnel, and I started having a fucking panic attack. Like, out of nowhere. I just started hyperventilating and crying. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, because for me, I'm like, what the fuck? This is so random.
It doesn't feel like your feelings.
No, it doesn't feel like my feelings at all. I'm just like, all of a sudden I'm like, and all I'm seeing, and I can see it in my head, was just black. I'm starting to be like, oh my fucking God. And I'm like shutting down. And he's just sitting here holding me going like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. And at that point afterwards, so once I calmed down, he was like, nothing's happening. We're safe. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. At that point, he was like, looking at me. I'm looking at him. And I'm like, why did I do that? And he was like, I don't know.
You tell me. Why
It was. I could just tell that he was like, I'm not going to talk more about that right now.
Yeah.
He was very unsettled with it, and with that, I was like, why is he doing that? Like, I couldn't piece together anything logically about it. I was like, I think I was actually digging for more. Well, what do you think? What does that mean? Why would I do that?
Yeah.
Why am I freaking out? I feel fine now. I'm fine. Why did I do that? And you were like, I don't really want to. I think we should leave it alone.
Yeah, I just said, I don't know. You tell me. I don't know.
Yeah, because he was very worried about like biasing anything. He was like, I'm not gonna do anything. I'm not gonna say anything about this.
Yeah, of course.
So, a lot of background information. Holy piss.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We are shooting episode 2 today. Emily, where do you want to start?
In the last episode, I was talking about how the therapist that I had been meeting with on a weekly basis was starting to pick up the pattern that a lot of the complaints I had about my dad resonated with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. I just wanted to make a note that basically when that happened, due to all the parts within my mind, I felt like a little bit of denial about it. It was kind of like, depending upon what part was influencing my brain at any given time, I would be more or less accepting of the fact that he could have possibly done anything further than just irritating me or being selfish, basically, because that's what I had, like, that's what Emily had conceptualized as who this person was to me, right? He just was this agitating figure in my life that I just had to deal with. And so, yeah, I started to notice that there was, I guess, I could feel this weird inconsistency in my own beliefs about him at that point.
Would you say it was like internal conflict? Like, are you being pulled one way or the other? Or like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so, but at that point, I had literally no awareness of anything. So yeah, it felt like one moment, if I'm thinking about that whole idea of him having NPD, I'm having this approach to it. And then in an hour and a half, I think about it again because somebody asked me or whatever, and I'm like, this is interesting. I'm having a different approach to it completely. And people change their minds, but going back and forth between different kind of points of view was what, it was having me like be a little bit disoriented, I guess, about it. Yeah,
and I just want to throw something in there real quick, kind of about this. You've always been that way.
Yeah.
That was, you know, it was internal conflict, you know, with what you were going to wear.
Yeah.
But you weren't worried about what you were wearing. You were worried about the style.
Yeah.
And what you wanted to look like that day and what you would look like previously and how that might be confusing to others. And
yeah.
I just remember you going through like this really big preppy sort of in our age, a Hollister phase, right? But then, you know, the day before you were sort of kind of dressed like you are now almost. You know, silly memes on the shirt, sometimes almost tomboy, gothic, yeah, right. Okay. Like, you know, the black nails.
We're sensing a lot of themes going on here, a lot of styles going on here, yeah.
The whole point is there's these themes that I've noticed and that you've noticed, and I want to point out to the viewers now, of this conflict that isn't normal conflict, but looks like normal conflict to everyone else.
It can be easily mistaken as just, oh, well, they just like that style, and then they're changing their mind. But when you're flip-flopping back and forth between the same four all the time, it was, I guess, I would say, at the worst, it was a little dysphoric.
Yeah.
Meaning that I felt like my image, it wasn't consistent, it was incongruent with like how I would feel one moment to the next. It would change, and so it would be really frustrating because I would be like, oh, this is what I feel like about myself. It's this. I can tell this is how I want to present myself. It's like who I am. I can tell this is who I am.
Right.
And then the next day, I would wake up and it was like,
oh, I could never wear that. How did I wear that yesterday?
this is so completely different. And I had the memory to know that in my laundry, I'm looking at the shit from yesterday that was completely different. And I'm like looking at what I've chosen now. And I know that I felt a certain way yesterday. And so now I'm looking at myself being like, I guess I felt emotionally like I was longing for what other people had, which was the stability and the consistency in their image. So
I had already supported you in not seeing him, right? Like basically putting him on the back burner. I think at that point you were conflicted. Like you're mentioning, right? You were in conflict with the NPD.
Well, yeah, it was like I had periods of time when I had cut him off. My mom had encouraged me to do that even at younger ages because there were points when I would reach my max limit on dealing with him. I had such an immense responsibility towards holding his feelings as a priority. So, so then I went to my therapist, and my therapist suggested to create a boundary, whether that be limiting the amount of time I saw him or completely cutting off the relationship as a whole. And she was very like, it's up to you. What is going to make you feel comfortable? What is making you happy? Because that's what boundaries are about. It's not about making the other person happy at all. It's about you feeling safe or comfortable in your situation. I was like, I don't want to know him. Like, I don't want to deal with him. I don't want to deal with him anymore. This is really hard because I don't know why, but I'm having Hayden switch back and forth.
It's okay.
And I can't, like, stop.
It's the conversation you're having, but it's
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
So, yeah, she told you to step away. And
Yeah.
and you did. You were like, okay, I'm going to start doing that. And how did that make you feel and what ended up happening?
I can't remember that well, but I basically let him know that I didn't want to talk to him anymore. I like, committed. Mentally, I knew I had to commit to it, like, actually be like, no, I'm not going to talk to him. Because he is persistent. He would never, like, my choices were not my choices. That's the thing, is like, he would decide for me what I had to do. And so that was hard for me, like, standing up against him, knowing what his desires were. And then it's so fucking hard because we're all different, and it's like really, really hard. Okay, it's fine. I'm trying to mask, and I'm trying not to mask at the same time. So I'm pulling at myself. Okay, so wait, what did I just say a second ago? I think I'm switching a lot, which is why I think I can't remember what's happening.
It's hard to keep track.
So I got the boundary off, or I cut him off. At that point, after researching, I found out that is what really allowed the gates to open towards basically the other parts of my mind that were holding memories that I didn't have access to as Emily. Basically, when I cut him off, it was like my brain perceived enough safety in my circumstance to allow the memories to start coming in.
I just want to clarify something.
Yeah.
You said, oh geez, what did you just say? Fuck.
Yes.
You decided to break away from him fully, right? No communication. You decided this is for your safety, and you don't even know why. But you're like, I'm done with him, right?
I was just like, well, with the kids thing, I was like, he's not going to be around my kids, period, point blank.
Well, you were freaked out. And so what I was trying to clarify was you said that the memories were able to sort of come through because parts of you realized that you were in a safe space. How long did that take? Was that like immediately? Was that a couple months later?
It trickled in.
It trickled in.
Within a month or two, I started to recognize that basically the internal voices. So we all hear a voice when we speak in our head. I mean, not we all. I think actually there's some sort of like understanding that some people don't have an internal voice.
Yeah, I have zero internal dialogue. Like
internal dialogue.
Yeah, I have none.
So okay, so I absolutely do, and I started to recognize that the voices that were in my brain, like the way that I would think when I would speak to myself in my head, those voices would change. So I would feel like one in specific would tell me not to have sexual relations with Josh. And I could tell that this voice, to me, it was me. Why am I hearing myself like this in another, kind of like in a third person situation? Like, I'm hearing myself in my head, but it's directing me to do something. Yeah, I mean, you just hear yourself, so you think it's you, and especially if you've been doing it your whole life, it's always been the same.
You have no perspective.
So suddenly I'm hearing this part telling me not to have sex with you, and it's mad. And I'm like, I told you that day. We were sitting on the couch, and like, I was like, I think I can hear someone telling me not to have sex with you.
Mm-hmm.
And you were like, why? And I was like, I don't know. And so like, that was the beginning of it. And like, that's how it started. Like, I was also encouraged to journal. So I would write, I still have them, so I wanted to go ahead and pull them out, okay? I was encouraged to journal what I was experiencing. I would just write whatever was coming in my mind. Blah, 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 just writing. And I started to have flashbacks. Like, the first one I had was from a little part who eventually named themselves Bunny. And she was 5 or 4.5, 5, whatever. And so I remember specifically writing in her young phrasing and like the way that she was speaking in the writing. It's me, though. It's me at 4.5. It's trapped in my freaking consciousness. That was crazy. And so I'm starting to have awareness, right? That like something's going on mentally for me. I'm not sure what is going on. I'm just trying to do what my therapist is asking me. I'm like, how do I be a good student here? Because like, that's how I am. I'm like, I'm just gonna do what I'm supposed to do. Like, whatever, right? I also, at the time, was listening to an audiobook. So I would go running because that was my primary like method of coping skills, along with starvation. Top tier. Anyway, so
Do not recommend.
no, dude, not healthy. I would go running. I would listen to this audiobook thing, and it was a book called Silently Seduced. And I remember it vividly because it was the first stepping stone for me, recognizing that there was harm coming from my dad in my life, past just being irritating as shit. And I started to recognize that it was like my brain was allowing me bit by bit by bit to accept that there was harm. Because that was so hard. That was so hard for my consciousness, like Emily, my day-to-day self, the self that didn't have awareness of any of these memories. It was so hard for me as Emily to accept that anything, especially sexually, that at that point it wasn't even that. Like, I was like, okay, cool. It's just that he treated me like a spouse, right? He made me make him dinner. He treated me like his best friend. I was alone with him in his house, right? And he would prioritize only me. He said he didn't want to have relationships with other women at all. He said, you're the only one I need to focus on right now. You can imagine at like 8 years old, that's a really odd and difficult thing, and way too heavy is what my therapist said at the time, of a responsibility for a child. So at this point, I was grabbing onto, okay, the memories I have right now, which changed, are that this man is treating me like a spouse, and this is emotional incest. That's what this book centered around. And that was the first taste of like, honestly, freedom. Like, I was like,
You felt heard.
this is why I
have hated him my whole life.
Yes, because it causes a love-hate relationship with your parent. And so I was like, this explains everything. Like, I was like, this is it. This is like why nobody understood me. Why everybody was always like, how could you hate your dad? Like, he's such a charismatic, fun guy. Ugh. And I always felt very invalidated. Like, I was just like, the only person that understood me was my mom. And it was because she had been personally victimized, Regina George, by him too.
Yeah.
And I was like, cool. So that book was great. And yet it was just the beginning. And I had absolutely no idea at that point. I kept working with my therapist. This is always once a week. Boom, 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 like clockwork. I found some other books of my own doing. And I was like, I was very interested in this emotional incest. And it's because parts of me were like, actual incest. And I was like, what? What? Why do I feel compelled? Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this way? There's no way. There's no way. There's no way. And honestly, incest is just a taboo ass word. Like, it's a word that only conveys that basically two people in a family have a consenting relationship at all. Okay, no, all right? Because emotional incest or even regular incest does not signify that this was chosen. It was chosen by one of them. Yeah, facing that word itself was hard for me. And so I feel like for survivors of things like this, I hear you that word is so off-putting and so hard to digest. And you can do this, even if it's disgusting beyond belief. Because you know what? It was never your fault. Anyways.
The viewers, like, you know, again, like you just said, it sounds crazy, the word incest itself. But unfortunately, this is a really common issue, you know, where especially where you have, you know, a single father or a single mother.
Yes. Usually if it's one parent is emotionally absent, then the child will become the default partner / confidant or whatever of the other parent who feels isolated or alone. The other two things that I want to mention are this book, Secret Survivors, which at that time I picked up on Amazon. The reason I picked it up actually was because one of the things I did in my spare time, other than journaling, was find research articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, about incest. And so this author was referenced so many times, like more than anybody, right? And I was like, this book, like, must be good. So I got it off Amazon. It was cheap. It was literally a secondhand book, and highly recommend if you feel like you resonate with any part of my journey. Anyways, so as I read this book, I realized that so many traits about myself, so many things about myself were due to this abuse. Like, because I started to actually accept that there was physical incest going on at that time, right? So I started to realize, like, he did something to me, bro. Like, I don't know what he did to me, but I'm hearing shit. People are talking to me in my head. I am pulled to know everything about this topic, and I'm looking it up like it's my job. Speaking of my job, I, around this time, found a job in addiction recovery treatment, which I had already worked in for 1 year previously before becoming a mom. So it was cool because I ended up finding one completely by chance. Like, I was driving down Canton Road, glanced over, and I was like, that's a recovery center. Like, I wonder if they're hiring anybody. And it was like really kind of a weird spiritual miracle, right? At the time, I was just like, wow, this is weird, because they happened to need a night tech. And because I had my third kid, Rowan, was a baby still, and I still had to take care of him and nurse him and stuff like that, I really couldn't be that flexible with my hours. But they needed the exact time when I was able to come in. And it was perfect. So I got this job. I was surrounded by therapists and basically a way for me to have more patience, acceptance, and grace to myself. It was like a refuge. Like, my whole life I had been like putting myself into extremely intensely high perfectionist type mentality. Expectations of myself. They were so high that, like, I couldn't breathe. So when I found this job, it was a fucking shell shock. Like, I was like, every person here is understanding. Every person here knows about mental health. Every person here cares to take care of the people around them. This job was like, it was just perfectly timed. So at that point, whenever I was starting to really delve into my own junk, it provided the most safe place for me to really be with myself about it and not shame myself further or spiral as much as I would have. So
these voices were sort of always there, right? Like, and people were probably fronting.
So fronting is code word for being the part who is speaking directly with the environment, the outer environment. So when I have a part that's fronting, it means that that part is what's conscious, basically, and presenting to the world as the identity that the body is. Well, you can have co-consciousness.
Yeah.
So co-fronting.
Yeah,
so multiple parts that can drive the bus at the same time, essentially.
Yeah, they're sort of there together, and they're responding, and you can hear them pretty well now.
They started to have more defined ways of being, right? So it was like, I can see the pattern here. There is a part or a voice in my head that speaks very kind of crude and is like masculinized and like.
Well, there's a part of you that does that, yes, on a daily basis.
Right. But for me, I had never had awareness.
Right.
Okay? I had never had awareness that I was switching on a day-to-day basis between these parts within no awareness of it. And nobody around me had awareness of it. It was completely masked from everyone. Myself, others.
Well, I don't know if it was exactly masked, now that you're talking about it, right? Like, you thought it was masked, but everyone knew that there was a crude side to you and a non-crude side, right?
Me, you, our family, they didn't recognize that these parts were different parts of my mind. As in, they were not integrated with each other enough. And so I had dissociative amnesia. I had amnesia. I forgot things between switches.
Subtle things. And this is where we wanted to start talking about, probably, maybe we'll get a little bit more into the next episode, but where you were saying DID is often misportrayed, right? I mean, you have very subtle, pretty common switches between your alternate dissociative identities, right? Like, you have very quick needs to accommodate, right? When someone says something about, hey, how much money was that at the store? Like I asked you earlier today.
Yeah.
I could notice immediately there was a small hesitation. You paused, you looked, and of course that looks like everyone else. Oh, you're thinking about how much it costs.
Yes.
Well, a lot of times it would take a long time for you to get to an answer, and I'd be like, how do you not know how much it was? You were just there. I mean, money's a big deal. And then, but now we know when you hesitate like that and you have to wait a minute, I'm asking, when I ask you that question, I'm really asking and triggering a response from someone who was there.
Yeah, so basically, because in a situation where you're triggered, you need to be able to respond immediately. So having switches, I guess, every system is different. Every person who has DID, dissociative identity disorder, is going to experience their switches differently. And it really, I feel like it's kind of based on how you needed to function through your trauma.
Okay, so how do we want to wrap this episode up? So
the last thing is that we were able to move out of his house that we were living in. So what happened was we started looking. The market was absolutely horrific for buying a house. We were like, we're stuck. We're never going to get out of this house. Like, we are going to have to keep paying your father, who you now have found out did stuff to you, for lack of a better way to say it.
Yeah.
And you would basically have this crazy disorder that you're starting to recognize.
Yep.
We got to get out of this fucking house, man. Because this was a house I lived in at age 7. I lived in this house alone with him. It was like a mind bomb or a minefield of triggers. It was a minefield of triggers. It was...
Yeah, I mean, it's the house you were abused in.
100%. And that stress was put on you as the provider, for one thing, because I felt like the tension between us was starting to like raise, because I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't do this anymore.
Oh yeah, we were in no financial situation to be able to leave. I mean, This is, interest rates are 6-7% at this point in the market. Like, we didn't have enough money saved to buy our own place. And of course, at this point, we're both trying to figure out, like, what the heck do we do? And I'm like, okay, we got to buy a house. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, we got to figure this out. And, and we did. Within 6 months or so?
Yeah, it didn't take that long, and like, it was definitely kind of a freak thing how we got our house here that we have.
It took a lot of effort to find this house. It was the cheapest house within 50 miles of where we wanted to be.
Yep.
It was a freak accident. Luckily, you had continued to look into this house because it said it was off the market when it really wasn't.
Right. But when we moved out of that house,
yeah,
it just started to feel like maybe we can deal with this shit. Maybe we can actually get through this shit better.
Yeah, I mean, and my biggest priority was honestly just getting the fuck out.
Yeah, dude.
I wanted nothing to do with being there. That whole time of discovering all of that, and then realizing that you had been abused, and like the therapy, it's almost a blur. Like, all I remember was just like, how do I get out? Like, why am I still in this man's house?
Yep.